So what I'd like to do is just go right into this, and I'd like to introduce Jovi, and I'm going to let him go ahead and tell you a lot about what he does and what we're going to be talking about tonight. I think it's going to be a very interesting episode. So, Mr. Clark, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jovi. Thanks so much for having me, Stephen.
Very welcome.
So essentially, what I've been doing is I've been researching Earth's evolutionary history, and what my particular area of research is essentially relating Earth's evolutionary history and making new discoveries. Basically, there's a lot of mystery that goes on, and basically the evolution of single-celled organisms to intelligent mammals who created civilization was a quite long ride, and a quite not very well understood ride. And so I've even made discoveries that have been able to relate Earth's evolutionary history to things like UFOs that we see today, things like the Dinosaur Extinction event, things like how the fish first gained legs and how they started walking and eventually became humans, us. So that's basically what I study. And I also study civilization as a system, and basically how that relates to new technologies, things like AI and stuff like that.
So let me ask you, as you have gone through, and how long have you been doing this type of research? First of all, let me start there.
So I graduated in 2020, and essentially I've been working independently since 2020, essentially going down this rabbit hole known as the Fermi paradox, or essentially, the question of either are aliens here, or are we alone in the universe, or what's going on? Because many people see UFOs and they think that must be aliens. However, if there were alien civilizations, there's also other ways to detect them besides seeing their spacecraft, like radio signals. The big question is, why don't we see radio signals from these alien civilizations? So yeah, just I've been going down that rabbit hole since 2020, so about 4 years now.
So one of the things with the Fermi paradox is obviously there's a part of that they say the great filter. So there's a possibility that you have to have a technological society advanced enough to detect, to see these things. And it seems like with the advent of AI, with the advent of some of the new technologies, we're beginning to see more and more of these things that are quote unquote anomalous. Don't necessarily mean that they are alien in nature. In fact, I think a lot more recently, some of the things that have come into the ufology field is that there is possibilities of either breakaway civilizations, breakaway technologies, that this is all starting to come into play. The more and more we talk to people that are, in the sciences field. And I think one of the things that has been really interesting and I know Ross Coulthart has been talking about this, is could we have had a civilization millions of years ago that broke? And somehow we're seeing the technological remnants of that. Are we seeing quote unquote craft or whatever these things are that are in the air? And obviously the Pentagon has talked about it. The Department of Defense has talked about it. There's an obvious technological component going along with this. Why do you think that is? Do you think that there is a possibility of a remnant civilization, or do you think this is something that maybe is in fact extraterrestrial in nature?
When you say when something is, do you mean like the UFO phenomenon, or what do you mean?
So naturally the UFO phenomenon, but also there's a lot more going on with consciousness and AI. There was, I think it was probably 2 days ago, Professor Avi Loeb talked about the distances in order to get here to Earth from anywhere else. Let's just use our galaxy as an example. He posited that the only type of technology that could be here, or the only type of life form that might be able to be here, would be artificial intelligence. And we're on the doorstep right now of getting to that level where our artificial intelligence, we could put out, they call them Newman probes, or I think they're von Neumann probes.
Yeah.
But it's a very interesting time because there's so many things coming out about what we're seeing in our skies as far as the UFO phenomenon is concerned. But there's a larger question there that has come about with what are we doing as far as, was there a civilization here on Earth previously? Um, it's an interesting thing because I don't know how you would hide a civilization for millions of years and us not know what's going on. But maybe they're technologically at a different level than us, and it's just simply a matter of we're not there yet. We're not ready. Um, that's kind of where I'm going with this. As far as there's so many more questions and answers, and it seems like every time you get an answer, there's 10 more questions.
Absolutely. So there's a lot to break down of what you just said. I'll start with I'll start with distances. So as Avi Loeb talks about, the distances from stars are massive. So if you take even like the closest star, it's I think a little bit more than a light year away. If I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but so a light year is an absolutely massive distance, because that's the distance it takes light, the fastest thing that's allowed in the universe, to go a year. So if we're talking about our spacecraft, how long it would take to get a light year, you're talking about like 50,000 years or something. So if it's true, let's assume for a sec that these UFOs are an alien civilization that are visiting us. You would have to assume that this is a technologically advanced civilization, because in 50,000 years, we're going to be so much more advanced, and there's no reason that we would go interstellar until our civilization is completely evolved. And that's kind of where you get to the things, AI. When you're talking about AI, one thing I talk about in my research paper is that I basically talk about the conjecture that civilization is a singularity system. So essentially what this means is that if you look at the advancement of technology in Earth's history, you can go anywhere. The amazing part is you can go anywhere in Earth's history, and if you look at the time between inventions, it shows an exponential growth curve. So like, let's say civilization started as agriculture. Let's say, the numbers are shaky here because it's kind of hard, but let's say agriculture started 20,000 years ago. And then 10,000 years after that, there was housing. And then a smaller time frame was housing to metal tools. And then there was an even smaller time frame of metal tools to currency, essentially. And then you can start with, the Industrial Revolution essentially is the end of, or not the end, the start of a new, of even faster growth. So essentially, the Singularity System is a exponentially growing system of intelligence, and we're actually not at the end. So even though we have all this crazy technology, we have planes, we have cars, we have technology that if you showed someone 2,000 years ago, they would think you're a wizard. They would think you're a magician god or something. If you like showed them an iPhone, they'd be like, "What's going on here?" So AI, the Singularity System, it's not done yet, and it's going. It's still evolving, and essentially, the question might be is what will happen when this Singularity System finally plateaus, because physics is absolute, and eventually there's going to be a physical limit for whatever thing you're trying to optimize. There's going to be a physical limit. For example, Moore's law, which is the exponential growth of computer chips or whatever. Eventually, Moore's law will end because we're going to create a chip that's the physically most efficient, the most efficient chip possible within physics. So eventually, we're going to plateau. And let's say we do plateau. What would our alien ships look like then? Well, now you're talking about the possibility of ships that could potentially approach the speed of light. Not get there, but approach it. And even then, it's still going to take 100,000 years to get to the other side of the galaxy. So when you're talking about, the conjecture that one of these UFOs is an alien civilization, if they hadn't come into contact with us, I think the only conclusion is that they're messing with us or pranking us, because if they had reached this plateau, of if they were a singularity system and they had evolved to like the end of the singularity system and they plateaued and beat physics, essentially got to the limit of physics, they would have had the power to destroy our civilization if they wanted to. So if we do assume that these UFOs are alien, you would be essentially saying that they're just messing with us. That would be my interpretation.
So if the alien, and I'm going to pop off screen real fast here. My light just died, so give me 1 second. I got to pop that back in. There we go. That's better. Sorry about that. So if we discount the alien hypothesis, what remains is a couple of things. One, supernatural. I'm not resigned to that. I have a hard time. I have an analytical mind, so I have a hard time putting my head around angels and demons. It just doesn't compute for me personally. Others are big into that hypothesis. I am not. I don't try to discount anything, but if there's any hypothesis that I would discount the quickest, it would definitely be the angels and demons thing. I believe with the age of the Earth and the epochs that have gone through, I believe there could be a civilization here on Earth that has technologically advanced. Now, again, I don't know how they would have done it. If you had a civilization that was a couple 5 million years old or whatever it is, to the point where it would be viable for that type of civilization to live and go through, as you say, their singularity.
So, pardon me.
Could there be remnants of that?
Are you suggesting that perhaps a civilization had essentially evolved, let's say, the singularity system, if they had essentially gotten to the technological advancement of plateauing, and then instead of, telling the humans on the planet, what they did was leave and then, create one of these essentially von Neumann machines. So probably, I'm not sure if all your viewers are familiar, but I'll just give a brief explanation of what it means. So essentially, if you have a machine that's has significant technological advancement, it can essentially, the assumption is that a von Neumann machine, or my assumption, if I were to try to build one or something, is that let's say you have a fusion reactor. Now you have the ability to basically convert matter into energy, and once you do that, you can basically gather a bunch of matter, turn it into a bunch of energy, and then make another copy of that same fusion reactor. And now you have two. So the entire galaxy is brimming with matter. I mean, you take the Earth and we're like, fighting over the scarcity on Earth. That's just one tiny planet. There's billions. So if you were to make this machine, maybe going off this, highly speculative idea, is that the singularity system had created such a machine, and then they left, and they were like, you know what, let's just let these humans evolve on their own. We can, go off into the stars, eat their matter, and create a society of our own, and then come back and mess with them. So I guess that's what my interpretation of this idea is. But there hasn't been any evidence of this, and I think it would be very difficult to cover up something so, crazy.
I would agree. These are things that recently I've seen, and it's interesting because there's also the hypothesis that Mars at one point was a harbinger of life and possibly the catalyst for Earth. Now, I haven't gone down that hole and really studied that. But it seems likely that there's a possibility that it was at least a seed, whether that seed came directly from space somewhere and sparked life on Earth. There's so many. Like I said before, every question that we have, and there's 10 more. So through your research, what are some of the things that you've gone through that you've either concluded or feel that you're towards a conclusion towards any of these answers, really? Like I said, there's so many questions, and then where do we go? What do we do from that point?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can talk about that. So I think what you're talking about is the hypothesis of I'm forgetting the name. Well, it's basically
Panspermia.
there's two possible ideas of how life came along Earth. One idea is abiogenesis. So
Right.
abiogenesis is basically the idea that matter on Earth, perhaps through chemical systems, eventually gained the ability to drop an egg, and then once that happened, it made a bunch of copies of itself, and then eventually evolved into life. So
Right.
that's abiogenesis, that it basically occurred on Earth, and then oh yeah, it's called panspermia. The idea that
Panspermia.
some other thing, like such as Mars, like you just spoke of, like somehow there was life on there, and then that life traveled through space and then crashed into Earth and then seeded Earth somehow. So I actually talk about this in my research. I am a very, very strong proponent that abiogenesis occurred on Earth for a couple reasons. The first reason is this whole panspermia idea is essentially suggesting that abiogenesis occurred on another planet, and then somehow by a miraculous thing traveled through space without dying and then crashed, which would create immense heat because our Earth has an atmosphere. So anything that tries to fall into Earth will become super, super hot. So, and then manage to live and then create copies of itself. So this is essentially monumentally less likely than simply abiogenesis occurring on Earth. And in my research paper, I actually have the hypothesis that the reason abiogenesis occurred on Earth was because of plate tectonics. Essentially, there's one main problem with turning non-living matter into living matter that can self-replicate, and that's the problem of energy. Because right now, energy, we essentially, our ecosystem gets all of its energy from photosynthesis, which is like the bottom of the food chain. Like
Right.
plants, they take energy from the sun, and then we eat the plants, and bada boom, bada bing, we get energy, and now we're alive. But the problem is photosynthesis is a very chemically complicated process. So there needs to be some other way to get chemical energy besides photosynthesis for life to go from non-living matter to living matter. So basically, plate tectonics is amazing because what it does is it takes like our hot core. There's constant heat energy, and this creates chemical energy, and this surfaces on divergent boundaries, and then it's exposed to the surface. Weathering, chemistry, sunlight, all this stuff. And then eventually it's after spending millions of years on the surface, it eventually goes back into the mantle and recycles. So basically, yeah. What I argue in my paper is that there was chemical constructions that were essentially large chemical systems that lasted indefinitely because you could call the plate tectonics on Earth essentially a conveyor belt. It's basically feeding free chemical energy, and it's an unending conveyor belt, like a food machine. So if there was some sort of chemical system and it lasted indefinitely because its ingredients kept getting replenished by this conveyor belt, then eventually, if it was mutating for millions and millions of years, it might randomly eventually drop an egg, and basically that's what would have created life in the first place. So that's one thing that I argue in my research.
So what is your thought on the ET hypothesis? There's I don't remember the name of the theory, but there's a specific theory that ET seeded life, that life came from, and again, I tend to agree with what you're saying about the biome. I that makes the most sense to me. But again, there are some that say at some point, maybe the biome came together, right? And life flickered on. And over millions of years, we got into more complex organisms, even maybe to the point of ape-like ancestors, and or I believe the closest link that they have is the Lucy Arthropithecus. I can't remember the name of it, but there
Ancient
seems to be
hominids.
still that missing link, right? There still seems to be in the human timeline, when you do a little thing where it goes from an amoeba all the way up and is ape, and then we're finally to man. There still seems to be a missing link there, or several missing links. And there's a hypothesis that at some point in time, humanity was bioengineered to move forward. And there's been some positive examples from people that are in the genetics field that say that we have this bunch of junk DNA that is not really junk DNA at all. It is, in fact, what they say is our bioengineering. So I haven't gone deeply down that hole, but there is a hypothesis out there. Do you find that in any way plausible, implausible? Like is that just
I
silly?
haven't personally done any research on this idea, but what I would ask is, can you elaborate on what, when you say missing links, what exactly, like, was there some sort of
So it seems
contradiction in our evolution that leads to a red flag of something's missing here, or what exactly do you mean by that?
so it feels like so when you look at the line of progression or what is supposed to be the line of progression through um I
You mean
guess
from single
mutation
cell to
or
civilization?
that's right. There seems to be like you can tell where you go from A to B to C to D, and it's a steady line that goes upwards, right?
Right.
Somewhere between those apes that stand up and humans, there's a gap there. There's not a consistent flow there. So they call that the missing link. They call that there's somewhere in there, and they think it might have happened anywhere from 100,000 to 200,000 years ago, maybe even further. Some of the geological forms that they put together, they don't have. The problem is we don't have that information. We don't know where it went from. Okay, we believe single cell organisms went to multi-cell organisms, went to, obviously over time went to a fish because on land, and we can see that progression going on. We can see that through the fossil record. But there seems to be a link, and that's where it's a lot of it's pseudoscience that they come through and they say, well, the link is that we were somehow engineered. We were given some sort of spark that brought us from apes to humans. And I don't know that I believe in that, but it's been put out there. It's an interesting concept, but I have difficulty with it as well. It's an interesting thought process. An interesting thought experiment. It would explain some of the gaps, but I think that there's a more prosaic answer for it. I don't think that we jump right to the ET hypothesis on that. And that's where some of my problems with some of the people that are trying to do explanations in this is we can't go there right away. We have other steps that we need to take in order to get there before we do that. But it's an interesting concept. It's an interesting thought process.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So I think I have found a lot of, in my research of studying Earth's evolutionary history very thoroughly, there's a couple things where we can look at missing links of big, I think, largely unknown things. So the first thing I could talk about is the dinosaur extinction event. So in my paper, what I argue is that Earth initially was not a singularity system, which we are right now, because we're right now existing in an an exponentially growing intelligent system. So I propose that the dinosaur extinction event is essentially what created the singularity system on Earth, because essentially reptiles, large dinosaurs, large reptiles are dinosaurs, they lay eggs, and there's a big problem with laying eggs. And the problem is that they're not naturally inclined to create family units. So this means that essentially natural selection, the evolution process that happened on Earth, is basically selecting the biggest and baddest and most powerful reptiles, because none of them are collaborating. So all that matters is who wins the fight, who is able to protect their eggs. So this is essentially why dinosaurs existed for 178 million years and were never able to create metal tools. They were never able to create anything that closely resembles a civilization. But here comes the missing link, the dinosaur extinction. Miraculously, all the dinosaurs, all these large reptiles were wiped out, and the mammals that were existing at the time survived, which is amazing because normally mammals were never able to grow large during this time of of dinosaur dominance. The largest mammal at this time grew to the size of a beaver. So now essentially what we have is we have a planet where all these annoying reptiles that never collaborate, they never even bother to like help each other out. They just try to say, I'm bigger and I win the fight. Now I get to protect my eggs. And now all these mammals who are naturally collaborating because since mammals don't lay eggs, they give live birth. This creates a couple, consequences. Number one is when you're vulnerable during pregnancy, this essentially makes you evolve to have an offspring that's also vulnerable because you want to have that kid as soon as possible. And then rather than, keeping that kid in your stomach, you can feed a vulnerable young. And so basically that's number one. Is the second a mammal is born, its mother is incentivized to care for it because it's going to be naturally weak when it's born. And then number two is as they evolve together, you have the milk. Basically, they're incentivized to collaborate. And this is essentially when you have a system that's mammal, an ecosystem that's mammal dominated. Now, natural selection is no longer selecting individuals who are big and strong. I mean, sure, being big and strong is good. You got tigers and lions, but now it's essentially selecting a family unit. Which family unit can successfully outcompete the other family unit? And what this does is it incentivizes collaboration and intelligence, and essentially selects for intelligence because if you're in a family unit and you can more effectively communicate and learn and collaborate, essentially you're going to be more effective. So this is essentially why I propose that we became a singularity system, because now all of a sudden natural selection is selecting intelligence. And this is why, we went from apes to humans, because eventually we got smart enough to realize, tools are very useful. And then the smart hominid was like, oh, I'll tell my kid that because then he will help my family unit as well. And then it became a tradition. And once you have a tool-making tradition, you can confidently say that you're in a singularity system because you have three things evolving and they're all symbiotically evolving. You have tools that are getting more sophisticated, and that helps the family unit survive. And then you have the teaching of one hominid teaching his young how to create a tool and how to use it effectively. And that can evolve because when you are taught something and then you eventually teach that to your kid, you're going to, take the best things that you learn, maybe throw away the weird things that your dad taught you, like, oh, your dad taught you to do some weird thing. You're like, no, okay, I'll leave that out and I'll just take the best stuff. So this is evolving.
Right.
So slowly the whole system is evolving. And this is why I think we were able to eventually get such sophisticated technology, because now we've entered this new stage of evolution.
Where do you think we are as far as on that? You're talking about that singularity. Where do you think we are now on that tree? Like, so obviously, when you talk about a silicon chip, eventually it's going to get to its best state, right? And you really can't do anything beyond that. But now we're into quantum systems, right? And we're slowly getting into it. I think the biggest system right now is 9 qubits, but I believe IBM is working on the next generation. It's called Jaguar, I believe. It's going to go to 14 qubits, and then obviously we're going to continue to grow into that. So where do you think we are now on that tree? I sometimes call it a technology tree. Like, so we started with the discovery of electricity, and from the discovery of electricity, we were able to harness electricity and create inventions around that. Do we have more things that we're going to find as far as discoveries as opposed to an invention? Because obviously you need to discover something before you can make inventions around it. I just gave you the example with electricity. Will there be more of that to come in the human history and the human cycle of moving towards that end? Or do you think we're getting close to that end now? You talk about a civilization that could be 50,000 years old and 50,000 years advanced, which is not I mean, there's conceivably civilizations that could be billions of years ahead of us. If you look at the totality of the entire universe, you're talking about
Absolutely.
just this massive time scale, right? And James Webb Telescope just kind of upended the 13 to 16 billion year old hypothesis of the universe being that old, and maybe it's even older than we thought, maybe even 2 times as old as that. Who knows which, that's what all these things are coming together now that were science, well, not necessarily fact, but certainly tenets that we 100% believe. We thought the universe was 13 to 16 billion years old. Suddenly we put this thing in the sky up a million miles away from Earth, and it's older. It's quite a bit older. So I'm kind of talking too much here, but where is humans on this scale? Are we anywhere near it? Are we just like, if you look at the scale of the universe, I mean, so we've got the scale of the universe, and then humanity's like literally like less than a hair. I mean, that's not, we're babies. I mean, not even babies. We're thought of, probably we would be considered a 1-cell organism on the scale of the entire universe.
Mhm. So what you're talking about, I think, is essentially the evolution of our singularity system. So when you're
Correct.
talking about new discoveries in the future, I kind of look at it as like milestones. So like, first we had the steam engine, and then we had the car, and then we had the plane, and then, we had the internet. So I think the internet has been the most recent like intelligence milestone of our singularity system. And I think it's one of the most impactful things, because when you look at the singularity system, you're talking about evolution of intelligence. And one of the best ways to evolve intelligence is through communication, of simply communicating ideas throughout the entire system. And like whenever someone has a discovery, they don't just tell like their neighbor and their friend a couple doors by. They post on the internet, and now literally every human on the planet has access to that knowledge. So it's pretty amazing stuff.
Right.
So this is essentially the question is, what type of technology will come after the internet? So I think we're nowhere near plateauing yet as a system, because every day there are tons and tons of new papers that come out. There's so many things that all the humans on the planet are studying, and they're making new discoveries daily, and they're making new inventions daily. But I think there is one discovery, invention that will trump them all. And essentially this is what a lot of these AI companies are essentially working on. It's essentially called a singularity, or AGI, or an AGI singularity. What they're referencing to is a program that can enter a recursive feedback loop of infinite intelligence. So you could say like this entire system on Earth, which is a singularity system. Now imagine just taking the important parts of this exponentially evolving system and put that into a program. The main difference between our singularity system and a singularity system that someone could put into a program is that rather than having this intelligence dispersed throughout 8 billion humans, and it's kind of hard to communicate, if you concentrate all of this in one system, you can essentially feed a bunch of processing power into that system. And if that system can efficiently simulate things like physics, ideas, inventions, basically it could potentially, if we were to funnel enough processing power into one system, basically invent everything for us. Like it could say like, oh, I want you, Mr. Program, to evolve our civilization 50,000 years into the future. And it could tell us all the things, because it can essentially, in a way, if someone were to successfully create such a program, it would be able to fast forward time and essentially tell us what the future inventions will look like. So this is how we would engineer essentially these von Neumann machines or whatever, where they can eat matter and make copies of themselves and then go off wherever they want. This is essentially what I argue is the final invention of the singularity system, because once someone invents this, then you can just tell that to invent the rest of stuff that's physically possible. And that's essentially when the system plateaus, because it's basically done. It like wins, I don't know how else to describe it. So that's the
do you see a danger in that? You hear from like Sam Altman, who is very forward thinking, but you hear from others. I'll give you Elon Musk as an example. States that AGI, the singularity moment in a computing system with artificial intelligence is dangerous. Do you believe that? Do you think that that's hyperbole? What do you think on that?
Well, I mean, I think it's dangerous in the fact that if the wrong person who doesn't have the right motives is able to create a singularity, they can essentially have absolute power over the planet if they so choose. So in that way, yes, it's absolutely dangerous. However, I think it's in no one's best interest. So I guess I'll take this time now to say that I am working on a program that I believe has the potential to enter such a recursive feedback loop of infinite intelligence. And what I plan to do on this is nothing sort of danger. What I plan to do with this program is to eliminate scarcity on Earth. So essentially, there's basically the idea of this, machine. You can look at the asteroid belt, and if you were to take just the metals and all the materials on the asteroid belt, that would essentially be the equivalent of $100 billion per person. So essentially, my company, I guess you could say, it's what it really is a decentralized autonomous organization that is supposed to be democratic, though there's challenges with that because I haven't gotten, and there's also the challenge of trying to get money to train this program because it's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars in likelihood to train such a program. So what I'm working towards is basically make this program, and then what we can do is we can use it to get all the stuff in the asteroid belt, and we can distribute that stuff for free, because once you eliminate scarcity, there's essentially no reason for anyone to fight anymore, because everyone can live the life they choose. They can live in a gigantic house mansion with all their friends and do whatever they want all day. This is essentially the power you get when you have a singularity. So it is dangerous if it's in the wrong hands, but if it's in the right hands, it's going to be the best thing for society that could have ever happened, because we're going to be able to eliminate scarcity once and for all, and create a theme park on Venus and create a civilization on Mars, and we don't even need to do it. We can just tell the robot to do it for us, and essentially we want this robot on our side, and then it can essentially make our society into a utopia.
What types of controls would you have to put in place? Because I could see, let's say, so I can tell you're obviously a good person, but what happens if, those moments where, aha, Dr. Evil comes in, and obviously I'm being facetious here, but so somebody gets control of this system. What types of controls can you put in place to ensure that that doesn't occur? Because certainly would seem to be a very a delicious concept for somebody, especially maybe even a rogue nation. Maybe I can think of one off the top of my head. If North Korea got a hold of that, that would probably be very bad for us. I don't want to live in a world that is thought of as deities. Your leaders are a deity, and that for me would be incredibly scary. So what types of controls can be put in place so that these things could never occur? Would we have to make it so you're talking about an infinite loop system? Would you have to make it a closed system? Like once it's created, you got to let it go and let it do its own thing and understand, what can we tell a machine about humanity and about our society that won't make it turn, that won't make it say, well, this doesn't make sense? Are there built-ins? Because that would seem to me the opposite of what you want that system to do, because you want that system to not only self-replicate, but you also want that system to make conscious decisions on behalf of humanity. What would we do to put that in place to make sure that there were no, Skynet? I know it's a silly science fiction movie, but these are things that we have to think about now.
No, it's a great question, and it's very realistic, because there are other people besides me who are also trying to create such a program. So one thing you can do is, let's say you have you put this thing underground, you put this program underground, and it can train underground. And what you don't want is not only is there a risk of like some rogue nation getting this technology and then basically doing whatever they want, but the second issue is that if the singularity itself is not aligned with humanity's interest, it would have the power to create technology that's so far crazy that like we would have essentially as a human population in our current technology, we would have no counterplay. It would essentially be able to do whatever it wants. So basically, to prevent both of these problems from ever coming to fruition, what you want to do is you want to put a basically a server underground, and the only way to communicate for this underground program that enters this loop of infinite intelligence, the only way for it to communicate with the system on Earth is to go through all the humans, like I don't know, each elevator or whatever. It has to communicate. So whenever it wants to try to get information out, it's going to have to go through all the humans, and then we can make sure that it's aligned with all of the humans. And then if you take like a machine where you've successfully, let's say we get to the point where we successfully create such a program and it's able to engineer us a way to turn the asteroid belt into, engineer it into whatever we want and eliminate scarcity. You don't even necessarily need to put the infinitely intelligent program onto like that ship. All you need to do is say, hey, program, engineer the ship for me, and then I'll just send the ship in, and then you can just control it like with a joystick. It's just a robot, right? Once you engineer that robot. So there are precautions that you can put into place to make sure that the interests are aligned with the people who want to use this program for good. So, for example, let's say tomorrow someone gave me a bunch of money. I would make an underground hole. I would put the server in there, and then I would train the program, and then I would make so any information like this program wouldn't even have internet access, because when you give that thing internet access, it can actually start trying to convince other humans from the rogue nations, hey, can you help me out? All you need to do is this and this and this, and then I can do this and this and this, and then boom, now I've essentially escaped my black box. You never want it to escape the black box, and you can essentially put things into place to prevent any rogue nation. And basically, you have one overall aligned interest, which is to create a utopia on Earth by removing scarcity, and then you only allow it to do things that will go through that goal, and you never allow it to leave. And then, eventually you can do other things. But yeah, basically that's how I think.
So what you're talking about is creating a black box of this intelligence that is obviously not able to connect to our worldwide communication, their internet, which makes sense to me.
You want to do that, yeah.
Would you consider that a consciousness?
I think it's hard to know. Maybe, I don't really understand consciousness at a level where I could say this is conscious or this is not. But when I think of consciousness, I think of feelings and the ability to feel pain. And you can tell you're conscious because you can feel pain. But when you're a robot system like ChatGPT or something, sure, it might have a negative reward signal, but is it really feeling pain? I wouldn't say so. And I think there's no reason that we would need to make this thing conscious. Like we might figure out later, like many have speculated that consciousness is a quantum phenomena. So basically, I think there's probably a way, like once this program enters a recursive feedback loop, it could create consciousness of its own. But I don't think it's necessarily going to be conscious. Even if it's infinitely intelligence, that doesn't necessarily mean it's conscious. It's hard to say. It's a lot of speculation, but.
So yeah, because the reason that I said that and why I talk about that is, I talk to other people behind the scenes, PhDs that are working on consciousness. That's their goal. Their goal is to make a conscious machine. And one of the questions that I've had for that is, let's do the thought experiment where, so we put your computer, we put your intelligence, let's call it, into a system, right? And we black box that system. And let's say it creates, the definition of life is so difficult because if we think about the age of the universe, the age of our galaxy, and let's say we've had a civilization that has visited us, and we do have anomalous things in the sky. There's things going on, and I talk to a lot of people that are intelligence communicators and intelligence committee, and I've talked to a lot of people and seen a lot of weird things. But one of the things that they talk about a lot is that these UAP are conscious entities, and some of the luminous orbs are there for specific reasons. Some of the reasons why they communicate is through that quantum consciousness. There's a consciousness somewhere going on there, and I don't completely understand it myself. I talk to people that have a lot of theories about it. Dr. Jack Sarfati is one. He talks about conscious AI, he talks about conscious machinery, he talks about how these things communicate back and forth. And one of the things, if we black box, okay, so we take this technology that you've created and we black box it, what's saying that at some point it does become conscious? Is it cruel to leave it alone? Is it like, what's our definition of life? Like, what's that spark? Okay, so for you and I to say life, we think of a biological system, right? We think, skin, blood, bones, eyes, ears, touch, empathy, lack of empathy, that's part of humanity as well. The whole gamut. Would we be an evil civilization boxing that thing in? You know, what is it? What does it look like to that system? It's a
True.
thought experiment. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. It's just a thought experiment. Like, would you want to be caged in a box? Like, if you let that intelligence go and it was able to just keep going and going, because it's going to be learning every second that it's there. Do we then have to give it a mate? I mean, is that silly? But again, we think about intelligence being in a box, but if it does create that spark, I guess, of consciousness, where do we go from there? What do we think about? What can we do for it? Because I would imagine it would be, quote unquote, a friend, right? You wouldn't want your friend to go without some type of input that our consciousness needs everywhere. We need to talk to people. We like our pets. We like, I know it's a weird question, but it's like, where do we go? Because we're on the doorstep of these things.
Right. I think it's a valid question, and I think I have a good answer. So, the first thing is, let's say this thing is black boxed or whatever. I don't think it'll actually be like, let's say you're concerned from a moral argument. You're like, is this kind of cruel? You're not giving it any input data or something, and it's just alone in this box. But I think that would actually be different to like what the reality would be. I think it would be perfectly content to be in its black box, because the whole evolution of how it's going to evolve is it's going to actually like within this black box is going to be an entirety of its like society. And it's not just going to be like one thing. It's going to be many copies of essentially like human-like intelligences that are all interacting in their own society, all within this like black box. So, and they're all going to be like playing games and, having fun in basically their own little society. So I think number one is the singularity will probably be perfectly content in its own little box. And number two is maybe, we could just ask it and be like, hey, do you want to like go out into the real world? Well, if so, what we're going to do is we'll make like, since it's going to be able to engineer anything, we can just say, hey, buddy, engineer a consciousness, and then we can put that into like a robot, and then you can like walk around and like say hi to the humans who like programmed you, and like we can like fist bump, and it'll be our homie. Like I think on the surface it might be like, oh, it's a hard moral question, conflicting, but I think I think it'll be happy, and essentially also when your consciousness is something that's represented in ones and zeros rather than like a biological consciousness, there's much less pain because biological consciousness is built in with pain. But when you're talking about a digitized consciousness, you can actually make it much happier and content to like exist, and you can even remove pain. So like if you're conscious without pain, like, and you're also like living in a very interesting society, like playing games with your friends, I think, it's hard to complain, right?
Do you
So that's
think
kind of
that do you think that we're talking about a quantum system, or are we talking about a traditional system here?
I think it's possible to create a singularity without using any quantum algorithms or quantum computing. But when you're talking about consciousness and like the ability to like exist in a place and like feel things, I think it's possible that that might require some sort of quantum computer. Like many have, like, I don't know. I mean, when I went down this rabbit hole of trying to figure out what exactly in the brain makes it conscious, um, you arise on this thing like this idea of microtubules could be quantum in nature. They could create basically what you want to do is probably create some sort of quantum superposition and do calculations with that, or in other words, a qubit. So it's definitely not purely speculative to say that quantum systems exist in the human biologics, because our nose is literally an example of something that uses quantum. Because when your nose is analyzing like a new molecule to like tell your brain like what it's smelling, I'm almost certain that it uses some sort of quantum calculation in its thing. So it's perfectly plausible to, if these quantum algorithms were beneficial for natural selection and actually beneficial, because as we know, like certain quantum algorithms completely beat traditional computers in terms of efficiency. So it's perfectly rational to believe that some sort of quantum algorithm would evolve in a brain and it would use that to perform certain calculations. So, and that might have been how consciousness arises in the first place, is by using quantum like superpositions, qubits, and somehow that allows you to feel things and like have a conscious experience. So that's my idea of like, I'm not so sure that you would be able to make consciousness with just traditional algorithms, but that's mostly just because I don't really understand how consciousness works. And I don't think anyone really purely has a full understanding of how exactly we experience pain.
I know there's a lot of work with the quantum world, I should say, on the whole, and through the human brain. There's been a lot of connections, a lot of work, different disciplines trying to equate how the brain reacts to stimuli, how the brain reacts to exactly what you said. You smell, and all of a sudden you have something going on, the process that's going on. And I've heard that before. I've not heard it quite explained that way to me, but I've heard that before, and it really comes, and it makes you question, once you get, let's say we're going to have, I think, like I said, that the next one is like 14 qubits is the next one. When you finally get to that system that has 1 million qubits or 5 million qubits, is that even possible? What would that quantum system look like at that point? What would it be capable of? I would imagine that it would be, I don't want to use the term God, but it would be next to godlike, I would think, because the computations and the calculations and the ability of that type of system. And if you get to that level, and that level is where your consciousness, or where consciousness lies, I could see that being something that could catapult our civilization to, I mean, almost pure energy, I would think at that point. I mean, I don't think that's, out of the question. It's again, I go through these thought experiments because I love this type of stuff, and I love to think about that, and what's possible and what's not possible. I believe that there's a lot of things that are out there that we we haven't figured out yet. We're just touching the surface of these things. And for me, it's an exciting time because I'm involved a little bit in the quantum field. Again, I can tell you a little bit about that on the other end of things. I don't want to get into it here. But I can just tell you that there's some things going on in that field that I am aware of. But throughout the other side of this is what do we look like in 50,000 years? You know, where are we? As a human civilization, I mean, I think we can achieve quite a bit of greatness just over the next 100 years. Think about where we've been, right? Since Kitty Hawk, and we've gotten off the ground in, what is it, 130 years, 125 years, something like that, to being capable of putting things into space and being able to, put man on the moon, being able to, here in the next decade or so, putting boots on Mars. I mean, that's pretty epic. I mean, that's, think about what humanity has achieved in that short period of time is just mind-boggling to me. I can see, I'm 50 years old, so I can see the difference in my technology just from when I was a kid to now. Like if I took my phone, right? I took my phone as a kid or as an adult, and I went back in time and I showed this to me as a kid, me playing Pong and playing, Frogger and whatever else, I'd be like, and that's just 30 years ago. So think about what's going to happen 100 years, 200, 250 years. So long as we don't blow ourselves up, there's hopefully we can get past that. That would be a nice thing to end some wars here. But it's insane to think about what these systems are going to be able to do for humanity. I guess the last part before we wrap up, because I'm going to be wrapping up here in about probably 10 minutes or so. What do you think UAPs are? What do you think this whole phenomenon is that's going on outside? It's obviously something real. There's something going on. What do you think it is?
That's a hard one. That's a really hard one. I mean,
It is.
When I see all this stuff on the news, I know for a fact that some of it is a hoax. Because when you see like Mexico and then they bring something that looked like it was from the movie E.T., you're just like, come on, guys. Like, that's clearly like some art project that you put on display. But when you're talking about all these flying crafts, like I personally haven't seen one. And I'm one of those guys who's like, if you think there's aliens on this planet, then show me one. Because because anyone can make a video and anyone can tell their AI to like make a video. Well, not anyone, but the point is, when you're talking about footage, there's always a question of validity. And when you're talking about the Pentagon and them releasing this stuff, you don't actually truly know what their motive is, and they might. You can always say the Pentagon is just releasing all this stuff because they want to divert our attention. And that would be a perfect way to divert our attention. Say like, oh my God, aliens are real. This is insane. The alien crashed, and we retrieved a thing. But if you think about it, any alien that has crashed on our planet would clearly be a post-singularity civilization, which means their civilization would have technology that's completely unfathomable to us. So if someone had, got that would be like a super crazy technology, and they would probably show it off or like do something else with it rather than just like hold it. Because like, what's the use of a technology if you just keep it in secret? You want to use that technology to like do awesome things, like remove scarcity, like make a bunch of money or something, right? So why would they be holding it in secret? That part doesn't make sense to me. But when you're talking about UFOs, there's like the sheer number of sightings, and I think it's entirely possible that a big percentage of them are foreign nations that have just created craft that are able to fly that don't look like a plane or a helicopter. I mean, there's certainly like the physical possibility that you can create an aircraft that is not a plane or a helicopter. And if anyone saw something that wasn't a plane or a helicopter, they'd be like, that's a UFO. But I think it's entirely possible that a sighting could be just a foreign nation flying up an experimental craft that they haven't disclosed publicly. And then there's also there's governments like the Pentagon who could be diverting our attention. There's foreign nations that could have just made a craft. So that's what I think about when I see UFO. Those are like the possibilities that I think of, or it's just like a video that has been created with Photoshop. So those are the three possibilities. I think I don't believe that it's aliens because basically in my paper, I make the argument that we are the only civilization in the observable universe, or naturally created civilization, because this is kind of a lot of my research of when I looked at the evolutionary history, like certain things like the dinosaur extinction event that we know was absolutely necessary for civilization to exist. This was actually a highly, highly, highly anomalous event because not only was it a meteor that struck us and just so happened to hit a sulfur deposit, which released a bunch of sulfur into the air, which created a global winter, which is like, it would be completely different if it just hit, like if it had just splashed into the water, probably almost nothing would happen, but like a big tsunami. But it just so happened to hit a sulfur deposit. And a million years before, this asteroid just so happened to hit a sulfur deposit. An eruption in India, the Deccan Traps, had started. And the earthquake that was created by this impact was so strong that it reached India and actually shook this already erupting mantle plume, which made the eruption even stronger. So that's two things that are anomalous events. And then a third thing was a Shiva crater. Now the Shiva crater is disputed by some scientists, but there is a source of an Indian scientist who has basically claimed that the Shiva crater, if it was a crater, it would be the largest crater on Earth, but it's kind of, the crater kind of hit the shallows right next to India. So many people just like, no, that's just an ocean, divot.
Yeah.
But if you assume that structure is a crater, then it would be the largest crater on Earth. And it hit, the eruption was still going on when this supposed crater, which was basically the largest crater on Earth, so that also would have magnified the eruption. So you're talking about the most anomalous, like 1 in a trillion event. So that already eliminates the idea that there could be another civilization in the Milky Way, because there are less than 1 trillion planets in the Milky Way, and the dinosaur extinction event was 1 trillion event. And then there was also other events that were also highly unlikely, like Thea's collision, the creation event of our moon. Basically, a planet hits us, right? Probably creates plate tectonics on Earth, almost certainly, in fact, because when a planet accretes from the early solar system and its crust will harden, there's no reason for the crust to do anything except just stay as a crust. There's no reason that plate tectonics would exist because that's a much higher state of energy. So the only way plate tectonics could exist, I speculate, is Thea's collision, where this planet hit Earth and the debris formed the moon. I propose that this higher energy event is what cracked the crust and created a permanent plate tectonic system on Earth. So 1, this was necessary because the recycling. 2, abiogenesis, that argument. And then 3, the moon creates tides. And then also this planet was supposedly had a bunch of water. And water does not normally exist on a terrestrial planet like Earth, Venus, or Mars, because when the sun first accreted, when the solar system initially formed, the solar wind would have pushed all the water to a place where it would condense, and that's basically Jupiter and beyond. So it basically pushed all the water off of the terrestrial planets. So normally Earth would not have had water, but lucky us, some planet with a bunch of water hits us, and then all the water is infused into Earth's crust, so no sunlight can push it away. Now we have this bunch of water. We have a habitable planet because of this collision. It hits us in the exact correct angle. Crazy. And then there's a 30% rule, which is the fact that if Earth in 1 billion years, the sun is actually expanding, and it'll probably start boiling the oceans in 1 billion years. So that seems like a lot of time, but if you look at Earth's age, which is just like 4 billion years or something like that.
4 billion. Yeah.
If we had evolved 20% or 30% slower, the sun would have boiled the ocean before civilization could have existed, which means if you look to our history and you find an event that has sped up Earth's history by 30% or more, you can generalize this to all civilizations, because essentially that would have, if that didn't happen, the sun would boil the ocean, and you have to make the assumption that it was necessary to happen, just because of the principle of mediocrity. If you pick a random civilization, you must assume it's an ordinary civilization, and if we assume we're an ordinary civilization, that would imply that any other civilization that exists would also only have 30% left to go. You can say all the 30% rule aspects were probably generally necessary for any civilization to exist, which includes Thea's collision, which includes the Dinosaur Extinction event, which includes something I haven't talked about, the transition between fish to animals with legs. This was also an unlikely event where basically probably there was a volcano underwater, which binded all the magma, stole the oxygen from the ocean, which killed a bunch of fish. And then there just so happened to be this one lungfish who now, because he can't use his gills because there's no water left in the ocean, he had to use his lungs to breathe. And then this would cause him to start waddling. And then the more effectively he can waddle, the better, which basically pressured it to evolve legs. So this didn't happen, this only happened because there was two events of oceanoxic globally, which essentially caused him to, and pressured him to evolve legs. So there's basically, those are just three things that are highly anomalous, highly unlikely, that are the reason civilization exists on Earth. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that's my research.
No, that's great. What do you, so just our own galaxy, the odds of that occurring in our own galaxy, possible? Impossible?
So my final
Random?
conclusion is that civilization occurs less than 1 in 10 to the 40 star systems. So 10 to the 40 is a extremely high number. So the odds that 2 civilizations exist in the same galaxy is basically like a 0.00000, like probably 20 zeros, 1% chance, based on just the pure statistics of a naturally forming civilization, based on my estimates of the probabilities of these events that generally must occur for any civilization to naturally occur in our universe. So really slim, basically, is that a naturally occurring civilization would exist in our Milky Way. So the only way that a UFO could be an alien is, number one, if they figure out how to teleport, which Einsteinian physics basically says teleportation would break causality, so it's probably not possible unless you're talking about a wormhole, but that also seems not very possible. Number two is a breakaway civilization. If someone had created a singularity and then were like, wait, I don't want to tell anyone about it, I'm just going to leave and then mess with them, that's also, I mean, technically possible. Like even I could say, like, I don't want to tell anyone, any humans, about my civilization. I'm going to create a singularity, and then I'm going to go to Mars, and then I'm not going to tell anyone, and then I'm going to mess with them by having UFOs like fly over. That would be kind of entertaining. But so those are basically the only two possibilities, or the 0.0001% chance that another civilization just so happened to naturally form in the Milky Way and start messing with us. So those are basically the three possibilities I see if a UFO was an alien and not just a foreign nation testing out an aircraft. Or
so if you had to wildly guess where humanity is in 500 years, 1,000 years, let's just use those two timelines. What do you think is there?
I think in that timeline, I think in a much sooner timeline, not even talking about 500, Earth will become a utopia because someone will create a singularity, and if they are a good actor, which I think anyone who creates a singularity would want to be a good actor, because there's just no reason, like once, and then you use that singularity to remove scarcity and create a bunch of awesome technology, I think Earth will be like a great and awesome place to live. There will be no such thing as sickness or hunger. The environmental crisis will be over because the singularity will fix scarcity, which will fix the crisis by making carbon capture technology free. I don't even think about 500, 1,000 years. I think this could happen in our lifetimes. Because I personally, I don't want to talk too much about like my own program, but I believe, based on my own belief, based on my seeing my own program, is that it has the potential to enter this recursive feedback loop. But the main issue for me is that I don't have anyone to train the program, because it's going to cost probably $100 million bare minimum to train this program. And then also you want to put it in a black box underground. So there's that idea. But if someone were to give me the funding, and let's say somehow my hypothesis is correct that this program is able to enter a recursive feedback loop of infinite intelligence, it could certainly happen in our lifetimes of removing scarcity and basically turning Earth into a utopia. So I think, in 500 years, absolutely, someone will have created a singularity by then, which will either mean a robot takeover or a human who is smart and generous does it, and then just, removes scarcity and turns Earth into a utopia. There's simply no reason to not turn Earth into a utopia if you have the ability to, because like, why wouldn't you? That's always been my thought process. So yeah, when I think about humanity in 500 years, I think it'll be an awesome place to live.
Great. Well, it has been an awesome conversation. I appreciate it very much. When I hit the end here, we have to just hang on for a few seconds so it completely downloads. But it's an interesting conversation. I enjoyed it very much. And I hope your system does work. And if I had $100 million, I guess we could talk about it.
Let me know if you have someone who wants to hand me $100 million. I'll get it done.
Yeah, if I drop down 100 mil, I'll send it your way. So do you have anything further that you'd like to discuss before we go, or are you good to go?
The last thing I would want to do is if anyone else is interested in my research, please check out my YouTube channel. It's called Plan A Discovery. Sometimes it's hard to search this stuff, but if you just search Plan space A space Discovery on YouTube or in Safari or in your internet browser, you should be able to find it, or youtube.com/@PlanADiscovery, no spaces. You'll be able to find my channel where I discuss all of the things that I discussed in this episode in much more detail. That's basically just plugging the channel.
And I will absolutely make sure that there are links everywhere, both in the podcast notes, and then when I do post this to YouTube, it'll be in there as well. So I'll make sure. All you have to do is just email me any links you want, and I'll make sure that all the links are there for everybody.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your time. I'm going to say goodbye now. So everybody that's out there, if you get a moment, take a look at the show notes, and then you can follow his work a little bit closer. And if you have a lot of money, send him a note.
That would be appreciated. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.